Thanks, Craig. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to our talk. My name's Scott Bowman. I'm a modeling and simulations technical lead at Idaho National Labs, and my background is a lot of grad work and work at SANS before I joined the lab, and before that, military, and before that, I worked at a nuclear plant. So I have a varied background, and the most important thing that I want you to remember before we get started is these are pre-commercial proofs of concept. And so if you see something that you notice that you really like, or something that you would like to add to or have tested, or any recommendations at all, please come up to our team and talk to us about it. We have a booth, and some of the other tools will be mentioned in this talk that we've developed. And so that's me, and I'll let Lee introduce himself.
Good afternoon. My name's Lee Maccaron. I'm a cybersecurity research engineer at Sandia National Labs in the Energy Security Department. My background's in control theory and risk analysis. So my primary role within this project is developing analysis methodologies to enhance the comprehension of adversarial activity and develop risk-informed responses.
Thanks, Lee. So I think we can go ahead and go to the first slide. So I'm going to just briefly talk about this slide because these are really Lee's slides. And I really want him to own them because they're just great. So if you're in a tabletop, or even if you're just in your day-to-day work, usually there's something you're trying to do collaboratively, right? You have a problem, or you have some task that you're trying to take care of. And you know, with the blind men and the elephant, sometimes you see that happening a lot. So we're going to walk you through how this applies to OT cyber, but let's just say there's an elephant in the room, and Lee's going to walk us through this.
All right, so some of you might have heard this story before. The premise is that there's an elephant in the room, and 3 blind men enter the room, and they attempt to identify the animal. So the first man approaches the elephant, touches the trunk, and concludes, based off of the shape of the trunk, that he's interacting with a snake. The second person comes in, feels around, and touches the elephant's leg, maybe wraps his arms around the leg, and concludes that he's touching a tree. And the third person enters the room, maybe grabs the tail of the elephant, feels the hair at the end of the tail, and concludes that he's interacting with a rope. And all of these people are doing the best that they can with the limited information that they have, but they're really missing the bigger picture. So how does this apply to OT cybersecurity? Say the elephant is our OT environment, and for example, we have an operator who's very familiar with the controlled process, and he notices that the process is behaving in a strange or anomalous way. We might also have an engineer who, through their interface with the engineering workstation, notices that the workstation is operating slowly, maybe isn't as responsive as it usually is. And then we might have a security analyst who notices there are unusual event logs. And of course, the details matter here. These are pretty high-level descriptions of things that might be perceived. But really, all of these people are doing the best that they can with the limited information that they have, but they're really missing out on the big picture. And the approach that we've developed is a tool to help aggregate all of this evidence so that you can see what's really going on in your environment. And this is one of my favorite slides I've ever made. So I had a lot of fun with this one. But the main benefit of this approach is that we are aggregating observable experiences across different roles and responsibilities that might otherwise be siloed in order to enable earlier detection of adversary activity and therefore enable a more effective risk-informed response.
So where did all this originate? So Lee and I have been working on this for 3 years. We should have an IEEE paper on it come out pretty soon, so look out for that. But the first thing that we had was a program called Coyote, and Coyote is a decision-making process at the end of the day. And I was handed this program as a new guy on the block, and they were like, do risk. And I said, okay. And so I knew a little bit about Bayesian statistics where you're aggregating data, and then you're making estimations. And at the time, I was a CTI analyst. So a lot of it came back to, you know, like if you're trained as a CTI analyst, you use likelihoods, right? You have to estimate what you're able to understand about your environment, and then you share that information so people can do the activities they need to do. So I said, you know, this sounds a lot like Bayesian statistics. And so Lee, go ahead and forward it. So what we do, like Lee said, we're going to aggregate the observables. So this is where you have not just network, not just host, you have people across environments with different experiences that are just like with the elephant, trying to put it all together to know when to do the right thing, because in our environments, we can't just be messing with it and investigating all the time and interrupting the process. It's just too costly. So go to the next one. So what we have, and like I said, because I'm a CTI analyst by trade originally, I had to give a really good explanation of why we would take certain actions. And I would have to have some kind of confidence interval. I'd have to have some kind of like, you know, if you use government standards, they have a likeliness scale that's a percentage, right, from 0 to 100. And almost no CTI analyst will say anything above 95%, and they won't say anything below 5%. So basically, Lee and I started talking about this, and we're like, likelihood's really hard. And the only way we could really rationally look at it is aggregating data and using a Bayesian network to give us a probabilistic estimate. So the next one is, as you do this, you give people ammunition. You give people a business case for their work, right? You're empowering these people, not just the analyst by themselves, not just the field operator out in your RTU rooms or wherever they're at, but you give all these guys a way to collect this stuff and say, what's the context around it? Is this something we need to actually consider anomalous, or is it not? There's a whole lot of work that goes into that, but if someone knows it's anomalous, usually they have a really good intuition because they're familiar with their environment. So we just wanted to provide a way to aggregate that and give that a likelihood score so that they could communicate that to their decision makers, or if they're the decision maker themselves, they know transparently how we got to this point. So let's go to the next slide. So what are Bayesian networks? Glad you asked. So the user provides an event, right? This can be anything from I saw anomalous traffic, right? Whatever that is. It can be very general. It's not a really good observable, but it's a start, right? You're starting to see something that you need to follow up with. So that's really the input, is the evidence that you have of something being strange. So within the network, and I'll show you how it's built in just a second, but what we wanted to do is correlate the evidence that you got with the attack process that the adversary is most likely always in the middle of. And so this evidence propagates against an attack process to tell you which stage the attack is likely at, with a percentage point next to it. So next one. And then given that observable evidence, what we call the posterior probabilities, that means with all of these things combined, this is the likelihood of the given hypothesis or the given thing that you think is happening. And so once we do that, you get outputs like this. And this is the core attack process in the middle of the Bayesian network. And you may be saying, hey, what happened to the ICS kill chain? What happened to all the things that we're taught about processes? And I said, well, there's a lot of them. And I said, but most of them have an early, middle, late, and impact. So let's just keep it simple. And there is a computational reason for that too. The more layers you add to it, it slows down the algorithm, and you're not getting any more information. So it's not as valuable as it looks to make people understand what's going on, especially when you have people from different backgrounds, right? If you have a field engineer and an engineer like actually programming the PLC, and then a security analyst, they're going to speak different things. So if the CTI guy's like, this is, pretty sure this is evasion. The other guys are like, I don't know what you're saying. So we're trying to get it to be a little bit more general and communicable between teams. So now Lee's going to talk to you about the actual structure of it.
So the foundation of our Bayesian network is the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS framework. And for those who aren't familiar, it's organized into 12 different tactics, and each of those tactics have several associated techniques. The tactics are high-level objectives that the adversary might be trying to achieve, ranging from things like initial access to impact. Just one note about the structure here, even though it starts with initial access and ends with impact, the adversary doesn't have to achieve every single tactic along the way, and they also don't have to progress linearly. And then within each tactic, there are several techniques which basically describe specific means that the adversary uses to achieve the tactic. And we leverage this structure in our Bayesian network so that we're all basically speaking the same language when we're talking about cybersecurity, so that we can interpret the results in a sensible way. So we're going to build out the network structure over the next few slides. In the center of the network, we have the core attack process that Scott already mentioned, going from early to middle to late to impact. One note about the structure, we did make them separate nodes because we recognized that the adversary is capable of demonstrating more than one behavior at a time. And we also don't require that one phase or one behavior is complete before moving on to the next phase. So we can track all of these behaviors independently. The adversary can hop back and forth whichever way they'd like, and that's all fine within our model. Branching out from that core attack process, we have tactic nodes. So these are the high-level goals that the adversary is trying to achieve. And those provide evidence for the behavior phases. They're all connected by arcs to all of the behaviors, but some have stronger relationships than others. For example, the initial access tactic is more strongly related to early than it is to late. And some tactics like impair process control and inhibit response function are more strongly related to late adversary behavior. Branching out from that, we have these light blue nodes which correspond to the techniques, so the specific means that the adversary uses to try to achieve a tactic. And then further branching out, we finally have our observables given by the yellow nodes. So the observables are the evidence that we provide to the network to get our findings. So for example, if the user were interacting with this graphically, they might click on yes for a particular node to say we saw this observable, and then that evidence basically flows through the techniques, through the tactics, and then through the behavior phases to give you probabilities for each of these nodes. So probabilities of techniques, tactics, and adversary behavior. And I think if you squint at this slide a little bit, it kind of looks like an elephant face on, but that's just me.
It's the best part.
So to give you a sense of scale for the model, there are a total of 14,000, over 14,000 nodes that we've built into this model over the course of 27 historical case studies of cyber attacks that affected OT systems. The first type of node we have are the adversary behavior nodes, which I already mentioned. So there are 3 of those, one impact node, and then we have the 12 tactics from the MITRE framework, 94 techniques from the framework, and then finally, you can tell where this is going with some quick math, but about 14,000 observables that we've identified and built into the network from our historical analysis. I'll turn it back over to Scott to talk about integration efforts.
So you probably saw that and you're like, wow, it looked like an elephant, guys. That's about all I saw. But so the real question is, how do you use this? So Lee, go ahead. So BAM really, in your world, if you're a SOC analyst or if you're using the tool, it's a model, right? It's something that you provided input and provide you something back. You're not going to be looking at the 14,000 nodes. You're not going to be, trying to read this huge graph that looks far larger than an elephant. But what you're going to do is you're going to have the right inputs in the right format so that you can convert it into those probabilities. And I won't get into the details of those, but I'll just show you a couple other tools that this was made to work with. Within the Coyote program, we also built 2 tools. Go ahead and, well, actually 3, excuse me. So Catch is it's the collection and analysis modules that take observable events from network and host behavior that are basically rule-based, right? So these are things that are supposed to be very odd, but you're not going to perceive them as a human, right? Unless you're watching your task manager or watching the processes within some kind of, memory dump or something like that. So Catch does that work for you, and it converts it into a JSON object, and it's in the standard STIX format, and that's the Structured Threat Information Exchange format. And basically, we add a couple parameters. And the key parameters are how normal is this? And there's various ways to figure out what normal is. In your own environment, you would want it to be specific to you because we don't have your environment and we were using open source information. We had a group of experts and we said, here's your observable, given your experience, what you know about systems, how normal is this? And we gave them kind of a survey, and we did this for 2 years. And then we asked them, how much is this related to the technique that you have identified it as being a part of this attack because it was written in history as being that specific technique. So we know it is, but how much do you say that it is correlated with it? And so we had a little bit of refinement there. We had great discussions. It's very interesting what everybody thinks, and it just goes to show nobody knows what normal is, and it takes a long time to get consensus about if something's a technique or not. So that's what we built into the model. So we're taking that out of your cognitive load that you have to do. And so Catch is the thing that you can write rules for, so it should be really straightforward about this is really bad and it shouldn't happen. And then we have Optic, which is a desktop application and also a mobile application where someone who's not so much a cybersecurity professional can be at an engineering workstation, at HMI, wherever, and they could say, I'm seeing this, and it's out of band. You're not like pulling anything. You're literally journaling about what you're seeing. So it's very much built on the premise of see something, say something. And humans actually have a pretty good intuition about things being weird, especially if they've been trained. So we really think Optic could really benefit rounding out the observations about this cyber elephant. His name's Neo, but then you can send those to BAM, and we have a way to visualize what the output is. So for your SOC, all you'd have to do is really be able to add the parameters that we define for you, and it can be an estimate. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it will give you a likelihood score, and then you can add more evidence and go investigate when you're comfortable, when you think your threshold of acceptable adversarial behavior, however much that is, and then do something. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're going to tell you, you know your environment, you've brought this evidence here. Now everybody can look at it and say, I need to do this, and I have the money to do this, so we're going to do that. So that's kind of what the decision intelligence and process is for this particular model. And it really is, if you're familiar with the Coyote methodology, it really is the Coyote methodology in a model, where it gives you a way to take in your observable events and then make a decision once you reach comprehension that you find acceptable. So that's what that is and how it would integrate into your SOC. So how could this be applied? Oh yes. So this is what we did for 2 years. So things like this, we know that Colonial was breached and they had a ransom attack that didn't necessarily get into their OT. We're not saying that, but we're saying there was an impact that caused the loss of revenue and productivity, and they had to, shut down. There was a loss of availability. We saw the news. We saw the people waiting with bags, plastic bags, to get oil. And so these are real things. And it was shut down for 5 days, and $4.4 million was paid. So that's not something we want to deal with, I don't imagine, unless there's people out there that do. That's fine. But so this is what we did. We analyzed these, and we turned it into sequences of tactics and techniques, identified the observables, and then went through this expert elicitation process. So this is kind of the first thing you have to do is identify when was, ground zero, day zero, which we call the triggering event. And it's estimated to be, and pretty explicitly, it happened on the morning of May 7th, 2021. So we basically reverse engineered the attack sequence based upon open source. We didn't work with Colonial. We didn't get any of their data. We just OSINT. All we did. And we were able to provide enough references to build out this attack chain. And so then we could create the observables that we could ask experts, how normal would this be, and so on and so forth. So here's where we get the tactics and techniques. So we became very familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS framework. So glad they could change it every year. That was great. And so what really happened, some of these things happened in groups, right? A lot of things happened at once. They got external remote services access because there was valid accounts out there. So not all of these observable events are going to be like in one place. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying they happened generally at this time, right? I didn't see their traffic. I don't know when it happened, but based upon the news and other sources, this is what happened in the terms of MITRE ATT&CK for ICS. And then a little bit further down the way, data starts going missing. That's interesting. And so that's like an hour before true theft of operational information happened, data destruction. They shut off the services, and then loss of availability and loss of productivity and revenue. So that's about 51 days from their data being leaked to 1 hour before to it's go time. So that's what we did, and then I believe you'll go to the next one. This is what the output of BAM looks like. And I'm going to let Lee cover this. It's his baby.
All right, so just to walk you through what you're looking at, the y-axis here is the probability of adversary behavior. So 0 to 1, or if you're thinking about it in terms of likelihoods, you could think of it as 0% to 100%. And along the horizontal axis, we're going to build out the sequence of techniques over time. Again, pointing out that the input to the model is the observables, not the techniques themselves. So we're basically taking all of the observables associated with a given technique, providing those as evidence to the model, and aggregating that evidence over time. So you can imagine that evidence might come from different observers within the OT asset. So starting out, we're plotting the probabilities for each of the nodes at that core attack process in the center of the network. So we have our early given by the blue line, our middle behavior given by the orange line, late given by green, and impact given by red. And we're plotting the probability that that behavior is either ongoing or the adversary has completed it. The first set of points here is basically the nominal value given by the network. So with no evidence, these are the approximate probabilities of each of these behaviors.
This is like the resting risk heart rate, basically. This is what we're saying. Like, we asked some experts, like, what's the likelihood of early behavior being there? And they're like, well, spear phishing's there all the time. If we have internet-connected devices, there's a good chance. So you can see that early is already at like 40%. The other are a little bit lower, but you can see that there's already some stated potential for attack, even with no evidence provided.
So first we're going to introduce our first two techniques, exploitation of remote services and valid accounts. So these are strongly related with initial access and the early phase of adversary behavior, as well as some connections to the middle phase. So you can see the blue and the orange lines spike pretty quickly for those techniques. Then we move on to exploitation for privilege escalation. Privilege escalation being mostly a middle phase behavior. So you can see we also get a sharp spike and middle, and that actually does carry a little bit over into late as well. And then we move on to standard application layer protocol and connection proxy, which are both command and control techniques. You can see we get an additional increase in early. Middle is almost reaching a little bit of a saturation point given the evidence that we have so far, but you'll see it continues to rise when new other techniques are introduced. Then the adversary is dormant for a little while until about an hour before the triggering event, when we have data collected from information repositories, and finally our first impact technique, theft of operational information, which gives us that large spike in impact behavior. Then moving on to the triggering events, so we have data destruction and service stop, both related to very late stage behaviors. We actually treat those two particular techniques in a special way in the network to add additional weighting to those. So we get additional increases in impact and late. And then finally, we have our loss of availability and loss of productivity and revenue impact techniques, which causes the impact behavior phase to pretty much saturate near 1 and all of the other phases to rise also. So this is an example of how we'd apply this tool for a given cyber attack scenario. We've done similar analyses for 26 other historical case studies and produced results like this for those as well.
Yeah, and I just want to correct myself. That was 9 days before with Colonial, not 51. I was wrong. But you can still see if you're a decision maker and your SOC guy comes to you one day and he's like, I'm not sure. I can't tell if this is a valid account or not, and we've got some weird remote services being used. You can see that like gets the early and middle up to about 75%. Now, as an analyst, I'd be like, might want to do something about that. But as a business guy or a manager who has to like put time and money into like diverting resources, you're like, well, this isn't late behavior. This isn't impact. Like nothing's happening, and you're like, eh. And this is where the whole idea of thresholding, that's kind of our next range that we want to get into with this tool, is understanding that you have to understand how much you're willing to accept. Like if you trust your people, if you have spent time to understand what this model represents, then you understand that someone has truly said this is weird, right? This is not normal. And they've taken the time to process that. And so you have to start considering their communication to be more valuable because it's done that kind of contextualizing that needs to take place. And you can see that if you're waiting for an impact, you're not even going to be, it's just a coin flip up until like an hour before. So if you're waiting for the lights to go off and everybody to tell you, hey, something's happening, it's too late. You waited. Like you're just waiting for it to happen. And that's not to scare anybody. That's just to say, like, not everything's going to be flashing lights and sirens going off. So,
I think that's where you hit the nail on the head, contextualizing.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that through experience?
We'll get there. We'll have time for questions, I promise you. Next one. So, again, contextualizing. Observable experiences for observer experiences, excuse me. So go to the next slide. So if you have to communicate, that's the answer to the contextualization, is communicating across various fields of expertise. You can't just have an analyst saying something's going wrong if an engineer doesn't understand the context of how it could affect him. And so we had a talk earlier today about tabletop exercises. And so I think your tabletop exercise shouldn't be so much focused on when everything goes wrong. It should be, how do you decide if something that's considered early behavior or not really affecting your systems yet? You need to have that conversation before the late behavior happens. You need to know what you're going to do when the early stuff that kind of in the BAM world gets into like early and middle at like 75%. Like, what are we going to do then? And not a lot of people have a really good, haven't seen a lot of good answers for that other than doing threat hunting. And that usually becomes like a very cyber guys are going to take care of that. But I think that the engineers and other people that can provide that context, especially managers, if they know that some kind of maintenance is scheduled, if they're doing something that these guys may not understand because they're got their head down doing the work, you have to have all those players in the room. And so that's why we want people to leverage BAM, is to actually define what is strange, what is not normal. And that comes back to baselining, and baselines are hard to do. But you do, at the end of the day, have to trust your people. And that's what I really believe in with this tool, and that's why we've been doing it for 3 years, is because if we can get the same people in the room discussing these events that may or may not be something bad, you can start to define when you need to get involved, and you won't have big interruptions, you'll have a lot of small interruptions, and that's preferable in my opinion. So, next. And that is the end. So now, if you feel like asking questions, well, how much time we got?
Yeah, we got a good 15 minutes or so.
Awesome.
Yeah. Any questions for Lee or Scott? Please raise your hand. I'll get you a mic.
Did I get the contextualization very well, or do you want?
I kind of know
Here,
what we've done in the past.
use the mic so the folks.
So the question was, how do you contextualize the incident or situation or actions leading to a potential incident? And from my experience, it's through expertise and subject matter experts that in each of their verticals or silos, I would go investigate, research, forensics, and make sure it wasn't like a blip on their radar. Because I remember in the consulting world, I would always tell my clients, it's not that the threat actor is not in your environment. Just imagine a situation that they're there and act accordingly, because they're in there for reconnaissance and they're going to be there for a while. So how do I contextualize this? Whatever blips I go to ask my different silos or different experts in providing, like you said, the information if there's any actions or whatnot's going on.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that we're trying to leverage. So Optic not only see something, say something, anybody, not just cyber people, is what are the strange things that are happening, right? You could have people like even record things like, I got this email that was from an engineering firm that I'd never heard from. You know what I mean? Like, that's early behavior, but it seems like I may need to look into this email, right? And so are they stopping? Are they sending it to somebody?
Another thing you mentioned was baseline. Everything goes back and it's on the baseline or the first. Then I know what kind of information I go research further.
Right. So one thing I wanted to add real quick to that is once you pick your thresholds, one thing that we're noticing that could be a challenge is the model doesn't have like a forget thing. It doesn't just like, unless you take a piece of evidence out, it's not going to lower the probability. But humans, if they see something and they're like, oh, this is bad, they forget. So the model serves as kind of a kind of ticker of what has been happening, what you consider to be weird. And you don't have to investigate everything, but at least you have that record of, hey, we thought this was weird back 3 days ago. We went and saw it, didn't seem like anything, but it was there. So, go ahead.
Elephants never forget, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Neo.
So yeah, just talking real quick about your observables. I like the way that you're going about it with like an inductive reasoning. You assume an attack and then you go prove whether it happened. How are you, and you touched it a little bit, but like even when you have multiple humans, I may trust one person more than another person. You have to start ranking them and giving the quality of that one, and then find out where you're missing observables. So using your same model, are you able to come in and say, I don't have enough coverage, I need to go put more instrumentation, or I need to put more process because I need observables that are missing?
Yeah, so I think the core element of your question is basically centered around how useful certain pieces of information are. And we actually have a way that we rank the value of different pieces of information within the network that we refer to as diagnosticity. It's basically a ratio of how likely the observable is to be generated as a result of a technique versus how frequently it appears normally. So we do know which observables are most valuable for identifying certain techniques. So we could say, if we have some low diagnosticity observables, we can identify, hey, what pieces of information would get us over whatever threshold we need to be confident that this technique is occurring. So we can identify what the most useful artifacts would be.
So, and I'll just add on a little bit. So ideally, like if you had your whole organization using this optic tool or see something, say something, and some people were saying that, I saw this and they don't know anything about cybersecurity. They're just like suspicious people, and that's fair. Like they're afraid of their information getting stolen or whatever. There's ways that you can weight that, and that's diagnosticity is one way. But we use experts, and it would be interesting to see what it would be like if we had people that had no idea and they're just sending observables, right? We have not stress tested it to do that, right? So this is, again, this kind of comes about what the labs do in the pre-commercial phase is what can we take this to and what scale can we take it to? And then we stress test it to see if the model needs to be more flexible, whose hands it needs to be in, right? Because you don't want a bunch of alarms because 100 people sent you spear phishing email observables, right? So, exactly. There's plenty of random noise generation. And that's why we didn't just keep expanding the observables, because at that point you become like virus total, right? You're just like collecting things to collect them. And those only have a short half-life, right? The ones that kind of became the core observables weren't so much the IOCs, right? The specific IPs and the specific files. And it comes back to why we use the tactics and techniques, because we're looking for behaviors. We're not looking for just one piece of malware. We're looking for things that throughout the last 20 years, they look about the same. Maybe the IP changes, maybe the file extension changes. Those are all changeable things. And so CISA uses the term indicator of behavior in some of their products. Before I was trained to use indicator of attack. Right, so these are just more terms that cyber people make up, but it's the same thing. You're looking at like general behavior that is indicative of things that shouldn't be happening, and I think it's a communication driver. And your idea of, hey, we've got observables here, I would probably use people first as kind of like the cheapest thing. You're not going to go in and completely put a new tap just because you got a new, some weird processes or something like that. But you can use humans to kind of say, hey, we need to refine the model to include these things. And so that's the beauty of it, is you can filter out, IOCs, like I said, short half-life, but something is recurring over and over again, maybe a pen test, and you're like, this behavior worked, and it's bad. So take those are core observables that if we see it, we know, all right, this is our threshold. So. Go ahead. He's got the mic.
Thank you. My name is Emil Pena, and I know Lee, and now Scott. You guys, I'm a former DAS from the Department of Energy, and you did a great job in presenting all of this, and I probably understood a tenth of it. So, and I understand the rationale, the reasoning, and probably who's going to get the most out of this almost immediately would be the government, right? But I'm saying, do you all ever interlink with groups like insurance companies that really look at predictability and try to avert some of these things?
Okay, so
does that question make sense?
Yeah. No, so if you've read How to Measure Risk and Cybersecurity, the book by Richard Searson. He talks a lot about insurance premiums and how people approach it in the insurance world, because that's where he came from. And so he influenced me a little bit in this, but the key answer to your question is that the insurance space it's a challenging one to tackle, because they're providing products to people with various situations, and they're trying to create like statistical realms of like the loss, the peril that they're at, right? And we haven't quite got to integrating with actual financial loss or what the peril is per asset, per minute, or anything like that. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, is like if somebody's down for so long, how much is it going to cost them or something like that, and how much should they invest? Is that kind of what you're...
Well, there's more than financial loss. So you've got to integrate, the breadth of what they could possibly lose. So that's what I'm asking about insurance companies, because they play off, or they should play off, predictability, and they're getting there. They're digitizing as fast as they can, but they need to integrate some of your modeling into that.
We haven't we've had conversations with like a Richard Searson type, but no specific insurance companies. I get what you're saying though, because defining loss in this is challenging, to say the least. So.
Well, and certainly the government is a great motivator, to be compliant, correct? But the ultimate backstop to all of this is going to be an insurance company, more than likely.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was just curious. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to think through ways that you're using the example of kind of human intelligence as like kind of like feeding the model with data. Would the ticketing system or feedback system be a good place to mine that data, as well as also, to get those observables to kind of, you're probably taking in a lot of data, but you also have a historical record of kind of what that baseline of information may be. Would that be a good input for the model?
So if I was to take this to your environment, we would probably have to spend some time talking about what's normal for you. We'd probably have a long conversation about that. Okay. And I would probably look at the things that you've identified as I took action at this point in the past and I didn't hear. And then we would start to build out some more of your observables from the general observables we have. And then you would be your own feedback mechanism. You wouldn't want me involved, I promise you. And that's your business. And so it would really be educating you about like what the model does for you and how you can modify it to your space. And that's what we wanted it to be flexible enough that it guided you, but it didn't tell you exactly what to do. You can see the structure of our observables and you can say, oh, I see what they're doing there. And so you could talk to your people and say, how do we talk about this? Because we're slightly pedantic people as researchers. And so we got very into the nitty gritty of like, this is the structure here, this is the structure here, this is the and it's not the way people talk, it's just not. Right. And, but it was a way we could all agree this is a good description of this event. Mm-hmm. So we would probably take a subset of those general observables and you'd probably have like a group of 5 or 6 people that are going to be looking at this stuff and say, how would you describe this? And then once you do that, you can take that and it's almost like text matching, where it's like, hey, Joe's saying I see something that looks like what I saw before. So the model's going to be much more useful for you, and it's going to be tailored down to your kind of core observable events that you just don't want to accept. So I don't know if that answers your question well enough, but.
No, that's good. And where can we get more information about the model?
What?
So as Scott mentioned on one of his slides, we actually have a whole suite of tools that the Coyote program has developed, and we're actively looking for partners to help us with testing those tools. So if you're interested, want to learn more, we have all the product leads here at the conference, and INL has a booth, 509. Yeah, we'd love to talk with you more to learn about the challenges you're facing. So
thank you.
Partners are key for us.
And everything is free.
We like to break things, but we also like when the private sector comes in and looks at what we've done and said, this is great, or this is going to need more work. That's literally our job. So
I like Malcolm, so.
There you go. Hey.
Thank you.
It's in Cali Purple now, so.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I saw that. Here you go. Sorry.
Any other questions? One more.
That was great. Question, the structure of the observables, it looked like they're yes or no with floats. Is there any way to extend that to feed in observables that maybe have more than 2 possible float values, or that do something that doesn't work off of a float?
So there's a couple things that we're doing along those lines. The first is that we have a structure that we use to define the observable itself. And so there is a little bit more to it than what we had displayed there. But we basically go through an organized way of assigning levels of detail to the over 16,000 that we've assessed from the cyber attacks. And then to Scott's point about the memory of the network, we're doing some work to bring in some aspects of time to the analysis. And so part of that actually involves our treatment of the observable evidence over time and shifting from a binary yes, no to a probability distribution between those values. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily do sampling and have a range, right? If depending on how much you wanted to, if you just wanted a very specific point value, then you're going to get something like this. But if you want something wider, it's going to be a little bit more computationally, a little bit more computationally involved. But you would get like a range of like, it's probably in here, 95% confident it's in this range. So, but we haven't done that, but it is something that we're exploring. So.
All right, Scott, Lee, thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate it.